Let's restate the problem. Bank of Canada purchases $100 million bonds from a non-bank public and pays with check. The non-bank public deposits bank's check in a local bank at first, then cashes $20 million out. What will happen to the balance sheets of the Bank of Canada, the non-bank public, and the banking system, and how will this affect the monetary base? We have already discussed two case scenarios where Bank of Canada purchases $100 million worth of bonds from the non-bank public, pays with check, but non-bank public deposits the entire check. In that case, monetary base increased by $100 million because reserves increased by $100 million. In the second case scenario, the non-bank public decides to cash the check and the monetary base again increased by $100 million, but due to an increase in the currency and not the reserves. This example is a mixed example of both. Let's say this is the balance sheet of Bank of Canada, balance sheet of the banking system, and this is the balance sheet for the non-bank public. Assets, liabilities, assets, liabilities, and assets, liabilities. A purchase of $100 million worth of bonds will increase the securities for the Bank of Canada by $100 million. And it will decrease the securities for non-bank public by $100 million. Non-bank public decides to first deposit the check in its checkable deposits account. Therefore, its checkable deposits account will increase by $100 million. But since non-bank public holds its checkable deposits account with the local bank's deposits will go up by $100 million. Which ultimately means that the reserves for the banking system will also go up by $100 million. Increased reserves for the banking system means increased reserves for the Bank of Canada, but as a liability. Let's conclude the first round with this. Let's say this is round 1. Let's go into second round. Now the non-bank public decides to cash $20 million out of the deposited $100 million check. It means that for the non-bank public, its checkable deposits will decline, go down by $20 million. Which ultimately means that the banking system deposits will also go down by $20 million because the banking system will become $20 million less liable to the non-bank public. That also implies that the reserves for non-bank public will go down by $20 million. And the reserves in the Bank of Canada's liabilities will go down by the same amount. Now let's go back to the non-bank public. When the non-bank public cashes the check by $20 million, non-bank public's currency increased by the amount of the cash check. So that is the currency increases by $20 million. But increased currency in the hands of the non-bank public means increased liability for the Bank of Canada, since currency is a liability for the Bank of Canada. By this, we conclude the round 2 of the transactions. Now let's see what happened to the Bank of Canada's banking system and the non-bank public's balance sheets. Overall, the Bank of Canada's liabilities reserves have increased by $80 million, and the currency has increased by $20 million. Securities have increased by $100 million. Overall, liabilities have increased by $100 million, and assets have increased by $100 million. Therefore, Bank of Canada's balance sheet is in balance. For the banking system, deposits have increased by $80 million, and the reserves have increased by $80 million. Overall increase in the liability is by $80 million, and the overall increase in the reserves is by $80 million. Therefore, banking system's balance sheet is also in balance. For the non-bank public, no change in the liabilities, so this is null. For the assets, securities have decreased by $100 million. Checkable deposits have increased by 80. And the currency has increased by $20 million. Overall net effect is null. Therefore, the banking system's balance sheet is also in balance. How does this affect on monetary base? Well, monetary base is currency plus reserves. Now, we already see that the reserves in the Bank of Canada's liabilities has increased by $80 million, and currency has increased by $20 million. So increase in $80 million in reserves, an increase in currency by $20 million increases the monetary base by $100 million. So in this particular example, monetary base does go up as a result of increase in currency and in reserves. Unlike the other cases where the monetary base was increasing due to only increase either in currency or increase in reserves. So the impact of the purchase of $100 million bonds from the non-bank public is the same on the monetary base. It's still an increase by the amount of the purchase.